Amazingly offensive, challenging you to think offensively, challenging you to be a part of the team. This is not regular interference. This is offensive interference. With the baldest man in entertainment, me, Nick Cellini. And welcome to Offensive Interference. And speaking of offense, certainly Georgia has a very strong offense, all but one of their starters returning this year. Defensively, a lot of questions. 8 starters must be replaced as game day is just a couple of weeks away. Georgia opening up their season on a Saturday night in front of a national television audience as they take on the Clemson Tigers in Clemson, South Carolina. Roddy Nabalsi is a blogger, has been covering the Georgia Bulldogs for a long, long time from ESPN, closer to the program arguably than anybody else. He sat down with me to talk about the upcoming season, the competition, the expectations. Here's part 1 of the conversation. How long have you been around the program now?
Since 1993, so this will be year 20.
Wow, 20 years, and Mark Richt has been here quite some time as well. I asked him during a press conference earlier in the week, I said, do you remember a training camp, a camp, if you will, getting ready for the regular season, being this competitive? He said no. I mean, a lot of things are up for grabs.
Yeah, and I'd have to agree with that. I was trying to think about it, going back to, under Donna and guys like that. When's the last time you saw this many injuries? And a lot of these are concussion injuries. I remember we had 2 guys wind up on the injury report for left thumb injuries, and both of them are outside linebackers. And this was before they were in pads. Like, wait a minute, you're not even in pads. How did you get hurt already?
How's that possible?
So all these injuries, I mean, hamstrings you're used to seeing, but all these sprains, all these concussions. I mean, Chris Mays is a huge man. He has a concussion. Who gave him that? Who gave, 6'6", 330-pound guy a concussion? So it is a brutal, brutal camp right now. Guys are getting hurt because they're all fighting for spots. And no one's locked down a safety position. No one's locked down the other 2 cornerback positions. I mean, who's the other outside linebacker across from Jordan Jenkins? You don't know. I think Rameek Wilson's not comfortable in his spot at middle linebacker. I mean, there are open spots everywhere, and it's just a wide-open competition to get it.
What happened to this defense last year? All this talent, and yet were guys just out of position? Were guys, do you think, looking ahead to the NFL a little bit? Just something was off kilter with this defense.
My take on that was they were rusty in the first part of it because you didn't have Alec Ogletree and Bakari Rambo. I mean, go back to the South Carolina game, the first play, Bakari Rambo goes up against a guy who it should be an interception. He lets the ball get ripped away from him. South Carolina's in business. They score a few plays later. If he makes that interception, Georgia doesn't get blown out 35-7. I mean, it's a completely different ball game if he makes it. He's admitted, I was rusty. You saw what Alec Ogletree did. I mean, this is a guy that technically only played the equivalent of 2 years. He missed 6 games with a broken foot. He missed 4 games due to a suspension. He missed another game due to suspension. That's 11 games out of a 12-game season. This is a guy that only played 2 years. He's a first-round NFL guy. Incredible talent. Well, it could have been first round, but of course he fell out. But you have all that talent, and you just they never gelled. And later on in the year, when the Bakari and Alec were playing together, they've been there for a while, you start to see them come together. I mean, you start seeing the whole squad come together.
Right.
But they were missing it early on. That's when I heard them. And then a lot of those guys, the decision for so many of them to come back. You remember a lot of them could have gone to the NFL. Sean could have went. Bakari could have gone. Jarvis Jones could have gone. All these other guys could have left early. And I think the idea was, we decided to come back. We've got this. We were great last year. We'll be good this year. I think a lot of them were just expecting it to happen because they decided to come back. They forgot how much work they put into it and how, I won't say they overreached the year before, but they really found themselves successful the prior year. And they thought, we're all a year older. It's going to happen automatically. And it didn't.
Is it almost better when you talk about this Todd Grantham defense to have guys that don't have that experience? They just come in and they essentially do whatever Todd tells them to do.
If guys come in without a chip on their shoulder and they don't think that they know more than Todd Grantham or Kirk Olivadotti or Scott Lakatos, if they understand that, hey, Chris Wilson knows this position better than I do, and I don't need to play it my way. Garrison Smith summed it up because he was telling me about how when he first got here, this is after their 6 and 7 year. This is not the team that, he wanted to come play on. And he says, during this summer, no one showed up. It was like it was a summer vacation. Nobody was here working out. Of course, what we were being told was they had full participation in the voluntary workouts. We hear that every year. Come to find out, as I had suspected and reported, they weren't having full participation. They did this past year. Guys have started buying into the program, and when they bought into the program, Georgia goes back to the SEC East, title 2 years in a row. Todd Grantham knows what he's doing. He's criticized often for having a fiery personality, but it produces results. I mean, you don't have the SEC sack leader a couple years in a row without knowing what you're doing. I mean, that's why he was that's why he's been interviewed by the Saints. Why everybody wants him.
Right.
Once these guys understand that, hey, I'm not smarter than my coach, let me do it his way, it's successful. Now, I'm not saying always. Coaches make mistakes. Every one of those coaches will be the first to tell you that. But when you have guys thinking, I'm going to run the scheme my way, or I'm going to go get mine, I need to bump up my numbers for the NFL draft, I need to be playing here. And the big thing we heard last year was guys trusting each other to be in a position. If you're in that middle linebacker spot and you see something happening far to your right, but you have a different assignment, and you break your assignment to go to the right side of the field and take care of what you think is a developing issue, and all of a sudden you're wrong.
It's a house of cards.
Yeah, exactly. And they kept talking about that, and lots of times you think it's just it's a cliche, stay on my assignment, do my job. But that was a problem. They weren't doing their job. Everyone was second-guessing each other, and I think that was an issue. Now, once they trust Coach Grantham and just do their job, trust the other guys to do his job, the defense clicks.
Everybody knows how big and strong Todd Gurley is. I had a chance, though, to see Keith Marshall today. What happened? He's like 10 or 15 pounds heavier.
First day of practice. Well, I'll go back further. Middle of summer, I come over here for a 7-on-7 recruiting event, and I see Keith Marshall, and he's wearing long sleeves, and I looked at his face, and I thought he had gotten fat. I'm like, oh, my God, Keith Marshall's been hitting the ice cream. This is terrible. He's going to look, oh, my God, he's given up. Then the first media day, the first day of practice, we're down in the lower part of the Butts-Mehre building in the multi-purpose room, and I see a guy eating, and his back's to me. And I looked at it from the arms. He was about, 5'11", 6 foot, and he had these huge biceps and huge arms. I'm looking at him from behind. I'm like, is that Tim Kimbrough? Then that's not the right hair. I couldn't figure out who it was because the arms and back on the guy looked like a linebacker.
I didn't know it was him.
I didn't. And I was like, wait a minute, who is that? And then he turned around. I'm like, holy crap, that's Keith. And, yeah, he has put on a ton of muscle. And he's fast. I mean, in that scrimmage they had last Saturday, he had 2 carries, one for 5 yards, one for 75 yards. I mean, he's just as fast as he, at least it looks that way. We won't tell until he carries the rock against Clemson. But he looks to be just as fast as he always has been, and he's bigger. And if you remember last year, go back to the Florida game and go back to the Alabama game, they didn't use him as much because Mike Bobo said, look, we had to go with a bigger back. I think that got into Keith Marshall's head. He's like, look, that's not going to happen. And he's one of the smartest guys on the team. And he's so focused and so dedicated. When he put all of his energy into the gym, when you saw the results, he looks gigantic. And if you look at, you saw Todd Gurley, he's big and he's really cut. And you look at him and then you see A.J. Turman and Brendan Douglas. That is a scary-looking backfield.
And for lack of a better term, I saw Keith Marshall. Keith Marshall showed up when he spoke with me and the rest of the media with a wife beater on. Again, for lack of a better term, I had no idea it was Keith Marshall. He's about 10, 15, 20 pounds heavier, and it's not like ice cream heavy. It's like weightlifting heavy. Keith Marshall worked his tail off during the offseason. When we come back, part 2 of our conversation with Roddy Nabulsi, he thinks Georgia's going to start off the season 1-1. Who are they going to lose to? You'll find out as offensive interference continues.
ALS doesn't just kill you. It shuts you down. Little by little, bit by bit.
It starts small. Maybe it's holding a pencil that gets difficult.
Or getting up from your chair.
Then you find it hard to turn the pages of your book.
Because you can't move your fingers.
Your mind keeps working, but your body doesn't respond.
You won't see it coming because no one knows where it comes from.
Soon you can't hug your mother or pick up your child.
You won't be able to tie your shoes.
You don't need to tie your shoes because now you can't walk.
You can't eat or shave.
Or laugh or sing.
First you can't catch the ball,
then you can't catch your breath.
ALS doesn't just kill you.
It steals your life, a little bit at a time.
And it doesn't stop until there's nothing left.
Unless we stop it first.
Unless we stop it now.
I'm Steve Gleason. Let's put our heads together and find a cure for ALS.
And back here on Offensive Interference, going to play part 2 now of our conversation with ESPN blogger covering the Georgia Bulldogs since 1993, Roddy Nabulsi. Roddy talks about a number of things, including who Georgia is going to lose to, as he says they're going to start the season 1-1. Also, he talks about their Achilles heel and the relationship, the chemistry, if you will, between Aaron Murray and his wide receivers. I guess you have to put egos aside. They say wide receivers are divas. You can't afford to be in this Georgia offense because I talked to Michael Bennett about it. You have to maximize every opportunity you're going to get. You camp out.
I think there was one game last year where Aaron Murray completed passes to 11 different players. There is no one guy. And think about it. When you watch him, he goes through his progressions. And, if you could be the third or fourth guy. And if you're open, then you might get it, if the others aren't. He doesn't play favorites. Now, we know he likes throwing to Chris Conley. He likes throwing to Michael Bennett. Who wouldn't want to throw to Malcolm Mitchell? And, if you got Jay Room out there making amazing catches and Arthur Lynch, who's just a big body, Aaron Murray has fun back there. It's obvious. You see him when he comes off. Even after a loss, he's always smiling. He's always happy to play the game of football. And for example, it's not like he has a lot of divas to throw to. You can't look back at that wide receiver chart and see a bunch of 5-star receivers. Basically they haven't had a big name besides Malcolm Mitchell since A.J. Green. And I don't know if it's the fact that they just haven't landed one or, Marlon Brown didn't really pan out like they expected him to. But aside from Malcolm Mitchell, who was really the number one cornerback in the nation, when he was recruited. And they decided, hey, we want to play him at wide receiver, just like Alabama wanted to. But Chris Conley was an afterthought in a lot of people's minds. Michael Bennett, and call it for what it is, a lot of people saw a white wide receiver, and he was dismissed out of hand. And he's the first one to tell you that. I'm not saying anything new.
Right.
He's the first one that brings that up.
But he came to the Rick passing camp, right?
Yeah, and blew it up.
He embarrassed everybody.
Right. There was a scout that was watching him in a different camp, and he put the word out. He's like, I don't know what you SEC coaches are doing or thinking, but y'all better pay attention to this guy because he blew up our camp. Then he came to Georgia and was just, demolished them. But again, this is not a guy that was, 5-star, ranked in the top 100 in the nation or anything like that. Jonathan Rumph is a JUCO guy. Tramel Terry is a big name, but he's been injured. So it's not exactly when you look at Georgia, you don't see that USC list of wide receivers. You don't see that list of like guys at Ohio State or guys at Alabama. These are workmen. These are guys that are going to bring it every play. And as much as people might want to criticize Coach Ball about not being able to land that star recruit, he takes what he is given and gets maximum effort out of those guys. And it's worked out well for him. And this year, it's funny, covering recruiting, I talked to a lot of really good wide receivers. It's like, wow, Georgia's really deep. I don't know that I want to go there. So they've been a victim of their own success. They can't land that 5-star because they're looking at the guys that are, Michael Bennett makes a splash as a freshman. Chris Conley makes a splash as a freshman. These are guys that are really successful early, and they're still going to be there for 2 or 3 more years. So Coach Ball's been a victim of his own, production.
Were you surprised Aaron Murray came back?
I was for a while. I really thought when he saw Orson Charles leave, I know it hurt him. He had already committed to Georgia, had enrolled early. Orson, remember, went past signing day, and when Orson came up, that was his host, and they played together at Plant, and he convinced him to come. He redshirts his first year. Orson doesn't. 3 years later, Orson's gone, and Aaron still has 2 years to go, and you could just see after he really wanted to go with Orson to the NFL. And I thought, I don't know if he's going to be able to make it 2 more years of waiting. But then after they lost the SEC championship game and seeing how close they came, knowing what a team guy Aaron Murray is, and knowing that, he's patient. And what could he have gotten going last year that he couldn't get coming this year? So once they lost, I thought, wow, he's got a good chance of coming back. And then I started asking some of his friends, and they were all, well, I think he's coming back, but I'm not sure. The one guy in all this, though, who was told he was leaving was Hudson Mason. And we found out that Hudson was expecting him to go. So at that point, I predicted he was going to leave because Hudson was expecting him to go. So I figured Hudson had some insider information. Turns out that wasn't the case. Can you imagine what this Georgia team would be like if he weren't there? Don't get me wrong, I love Hudson Mason. I covered him back when no one was covering him, and not trying to be a hipster there and saying I knew him when.
It's just high school player, but
I saw his progression, and he will tell you the difference between even when Lasser. But Lasser was a machine. You can put almost any quarterback there; they're going to get a ton of yards. But he is a different quarterback than when we saw him at the Elite 11 camp. When we saw him at these 7-on-7s, when we saw him at Lasser, he is completely different. He's bigger, he's stronger. He expected a redshirt his first year. He said, I'm not strong enough. So he knows he's a completely different guy. But the question, if Aaron Murray weren't coming back, would be, who has questions about the offense right now? Nobody. That offense is supposed to put up 38 points like they did last year. But that's because Aaron Murray's coming back. There would be questions now without him. But this year's leadership, having that 100% participation out during the voluntary drills in the summer, that's Aaron Murray. That's on him. The star player, the guy that has no reason to call everybody and make them come out there, do extra workouts like he does, he is doing that. And so if you're a third stringer and you see the guy that gets the most publicity on the team out there doing the normal voluntary workout, then doing an additional workout, he will shame you into going out there and doing some extra work. So I think him coming back has been a huge it's just, you can't quantify how big it is for Georgia.
A lot of people hate to talk about kickers, but Marshall Morgan's not going to be there. Even though Mark Richt isn't saying that, we all know he's not going to be there for Clemson. What's the plan B?
Well, it's kind of up in the air. You have Adam Erickson, who can kick. He's got I don't want to say he's the second strongest leg on the team because I would think that would belong to Colin, the punter. But Colin has kicked one field goal in his entire career in high school. It happened to set the school record, it was like 54, 57 yards. But he practices out here all the time. But Adam Erickson, who is a very slight guy, you see him, he's not big. But then Billy Bennett wasn't big, and Billy, I think, led the SEC in scoring. Mm-hmm. So I think Adam would be the guy. I kind of think it's silly not to say, hey, we had a kid that was arrested for boating under the influence. The case has been adjudicated. The case is done. Why not announce what the punishment is? I don't get that.
I don't think you're alone in that sentiment.
And I understand, kind of holding things back, but is there any slight, and I've argued it both ways. I can understand why give Clemson any inkling as to what's coming, Especially like last year, we knew that Bakari Rambo was going to miss some games. We didn't know how many. And there have been other times where we're not sure if Alec Ogletree was going to miss a game. If you don't know when they're coming back, I understand not making the other team plan for that. But it's a kicker. It's a guy that does kickoffs and field goals. Do you really scout the kicker that much?
I can't see how much you can. And even if you know who the kicker is going to be, there's not a lot of film.
There's no Adam. He has film from the G-Day game.
Right.
Which tells you nothing. There's no rush on those kicks. So the other team, will they spend hours and hours, breaking down, Georgia's kicking? I just don't see it.
Well, let's finish with this. If there's an Achilles heel, and we know that you can ill afford to slip up with these first two games of the season, then LSU in Week 4, what would that Achilles heel be? What could it be for Georgia?
Position-wise?
Yeah.
Position-wise, safety. Who are the starting safeties right now? You get Josh Harvey-Clemens is out for the Clemson game. His first game will be at home, or first game as a starter back there against South Carolina. So again, as we saw with Bakari Rambo, is he rusty? Is he battle tested? But who's the other one? Trey Matthews, who phenomenal spring, already being picked as one of the best safeties in the SEC before he's even played it down. I'm a true believer in him. I've covered him for 2 years in high school. I've seen what he can do. I love seeing him on punt return. The guy he's just a phenomenal athlete. But he's been hurt a lot. This isn't helping him, lock down his spot. He played in the spring, but they weren't installing the defense for Clemson in the spring. Now that you're doing the installs. You're installing for Clemson, South Carolina, LSU, or they'll start, they start working for Tech and work their way backwards. I've seen them do that in the past, where they install a little bit for each school, and then they have the big one the week of, the last week is their final one, and they work for Clemson. Corey Moore's been injured. Do you put Connor Norman back there? You lost Paris Bostic's not there. Shaq Fluker is a headhunter and he's hitting, but he's a JUCO transfer. He's new. So if you want to be a successful defense in the SEC, we always talk about the big guys up front, in the trenches. But to me, one of the unsung heroes that makes Southeastern football different than the rest of the country is the lightning fast, big safeties that they have there. These are guys that just run rampant all over the field. They disrupt the passing game. They lock down the running game. And if Georgia doesn't have a set pair back there for Taj Boyd and Sammy Watkins, that could be a really long day.
Well, let's hope you're wrong, Roddy.
I hope so, too.
It's always good to see you, though. Thank you for sitting down with us as I take Offensive Interference, my podcast, through Athens, Georgia. When we come back, we'll talk more about what the Falcons need to do and the segment that everybody loves. It's called TNC, not TMZ, TNC. See what I did there? Stay with us.
The Governor's Mansion, the St. Regis Hotel, and now Oxygen Financial. We are all located on West Paces Ferry Road. Come spend an hour with one of our private CFOs and get a financial plan in place for your future. Go to oxygenfinancial.net to set up a meeting today.
And welcome back to Offensive Interference. I want to thank Roddy Nabalsi for joining us. Some very interesting things coming from him as he feels that the Georgia Bulldogs will lose the opener to the Clemson Tigers, but then bounce back and knock off South Carolina. Let's talk about the Falcons, now 0-2 on the preseason. They lose in Baltimore 27-23, but not all that bad. Tyrod Taylor rallies the troops. Baltimore has a late punt return against some of the second and third teamers of the Falcons to pull this one out, but the Falcons at halftime were dominating this game. In fact, they led 20-7 at halftime. The only blemish, if you will, was Torrey Smith, the catch and run, a 77-yard score, as it looked like it was a zone. Asante Samuel passes off Torrey Smith. William Moore, the safety, takes a horrible angle. Smith goes 77 yards for the score. It's 7-3 Baltimore at that point. But Julio Jones, after some miscommunication early on the drive late in the first quarter, then catches all three of his passes for 55 yards from Matt Ryan, including an 8-yard score that gives the Falcons a 10-7 lead. Later on in the second quarter, Asante Samuel makes good. He picks off Joe Flacco, sets up a Jacquizz Rodgers 2-yard touchdown run, and that was the score at halftime, 20-7. And late in the game, Tyrod Taylor throws a couple of touchdown passes, and Asa Jackson has a 78-yard punt return with about 6:20 left in the game. 27-23 is your final. Roddy White goes out of this game with a sprained ankle, although the Falcons say it is nothing serious. He should be ready to go in the not-too-distant future. Lamar Holmes has some struggles in this game. On a screen pass, Elvis Dumervil beats him pretty badly, but Lamar Holmes playing against one of the best in the business, on-the-job training is what it is for a guy that only played 7 snaps last year. Steven Jackson looked pretty good in this contest. I know a lot of people said he didn't look so good against the Cincinnati Bengals. Look, it's only the preseason. Don't take too much out of it, but at least now you look at his numbers in this game and you say, not so bad. 8 carries, 42 yards, averaging 5.3 yards per carry, but the Falcons 0-2 now in the preseason. Matt Ryan, when you look at his numbers, not bad. Dominique Davis as well. 8 of 10 is Davis for 98 yards. Matt Ryan, 8 of 15 with that touchdown pass to Julio Jones. Davis horrendous at times in that loss to the Bengals last week. Much better this time around. God forbid something happens to Matt Ryan. This is the guy that the Atlanta Falcons are depending on. So as we move on through the rest of the preseason, you want to stay healthy, and for the most part, the Falcons were able to do that. Again, aside from that ankle injury to Roddy White, which again, as of right now, is nothing serious. So that's what's going on around the NFL, and in fact, we'll talk more NFL now as we debut TNC, not TMZ, TNC. I think you see what I did there. And speaking of the NFL, The Browns knock off the Lions 24-6, but the highlight of the game wasn't the quarterback play of Brandon Weeden. A streaker goes on the field at the New Cleveland Stadium up there and runs about 60 yards. He jukes a security guard. I think he kind of gives him the stiff arm. Hey now, perhaps is the appropriate term to use, before finally getting knocked on his naked keister by some security. At that point, he ran 60 yards, and if I'm not mistaken, the Lions as a team had only 44 yards rushing. I hope the man had some kind of a bet that he cashed in on, because I can't think of any other reason as to why he would do what he did. Now, the Boston Red Sox, as we shift gears and talk some baseball, they lose to the Blue Jays 2-1. Why is that significant? Today was Ben Affleck's birthday. The Red Sox are now 0-14. They've lost 14 games in a row on Ben Affleck's birthday. Of course, Affleck, a Boston guy, huge Red Sox fan. Congratulations, WWE wrestler Darren Young. He shocks a photographer at LAX who asks him if he thinks that the WWE will ever see a gay wrestler. He said, you know what? I'm a gay wrestler. I don't know if it's coming out of the closet, but you know now that I am gay. Of course, he's a part of the primetime players. He, along with Titus O'Neil, John Cena, perhaps the leader of the WWE, says, good for him. I'm friends with Titus Young. It should be noted that John Cena has a gay brother. So that's what's going on around the world of professional wrestling. Will anybody ever come out of the closet as an active player, if that's even the proper term to use anymore, in the NFL, Major League Baseball? Jason Collins, of course, coming out in the NBA, but he still doesn't have a contract, and he's kind of at the end of the line for his career. So those are some of the things going on. Once again, I want to thank Roddy Nabalsi for joining us. Hopefully you were entertained and informed by that. If you're a Georgia football fan, he thinks, again, the Georgia Bulldogs are going to lose their opener to Clemson and then bounce back and knock off South Carolina. Keith Marshall, huge, about 225 pounds of rock-solid muscle. So that's going to bode well for the running game. And who knows what's going to happen with this defense. He said, again, Roddy Nabalsi, who's been covering Georgia football since 1993, the Achilles heel is perhaps the safety position. Young, which of course means inexperienced, and also banged up as well. Don't forget, you can follow us on Twitter, OI with Nick Cellini. That's at OI with Nick Cellini. You can follow me on Twitter as well, at Cellini Nick. And want to, again, remind you, you can subscribe to Offensive Interference via iTunes. You can follow us on YouTube and, again, Facebook as well. Thanks as always for listening. We'll be back next week. And don't forget, over the course of the weekend, we've got some new items, including Vine, which is me essentially acting silly. You could see that on Twitter. And also something called The Audibles, which means here and there I will voice my opinions, quick blurbs, 10, 15 seconds, maybe 30 seconds. Maybe I'll get crazy and do 45 seconds when the moment strikes me. Have a safe weekend, and we'll talk to you next week on Offensive Interference.